first time Elias heard the barking, he thought it was nothing, just another sound the ocean had swallowed and thrown back without meaning. The sea did that. It carried noises for miles. It twisted them, broke them apart, returned them wrong. A laugh could sound like a cry. A cry could dissolve into the wind. Nothing near the water ever sounded the way it should. That night, Elias was alone inside his small coastal house. The windows were slightly open. Salt air clung to his skin. The smell of algae, damp wood, rusted iron filled his lungs. The house was old, cheap, worn down by decades of storms, and that was exactly why he chose it. Nothing beautiful was meant to last there. Nothing stayed untouched, and nothing asked questions. Then the barking came, just after midnight. One sharp sound, then silence, then another bark. Slower this time. Elias froze. Without realizing it, he stopped breathing. He waited for footsteps, voices, laughter. Anything that could explain the sound as human, but there was nothing. Only the steady rhythm of the waves folding onto the shore, over and over, like the ocean practicing how to forget. Then the barking returned, not frantic, not angry, measured, almost intentional. Elias moved closer to the window and looked out. The beach stretched empty beneath the moonlight, pale, endless, no people, no fires, no boats close enough to hear, just sand, water, and darkness. And yet, the barking continued, always aimed in the same direction, toward the sea. Elias glanced at the clock on the wall. 12:46 a.m., the same time as the night before, and the night before that. His chest tightened. He told himself it was coincidence. Dogs barked at night. That was normal, especially strays, especially near fishing villages. Hunger, fear, territorial instincts. There were countless explanations, and still, something about this felt wrong. The dog wasn't reacting. It wasn't chasing sound. It was fixed, focused, as if it wasn't responding to the ocean, but answering it. Elias closed the window and tried to sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening. Each bark landed heavy, not loud enough to hurt his ears, but deep enough to disturb something beneath the surface of his thoughts. When the barking finally stopped, it wasn't relief he felt. It was absence. As if something unfinished had simply paused. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same sound, same direction. By the third night, Elias stopped pretending it was nothing. He stood on the balcony, wrapped in a thin jacket. The wind cut through the fabric. Sand stung his face. Below him, the beach looked exactly the same as before. Empty, quiet, indifferent, until the barking started. This time, he saw it. Near the waterline. A shape. A dog. Medium-sized, dark coat, sitting perfectly still where the waves reached and retreated, wetting the sand beneath its paws. It wasn't pacing, it wasn't sniffing, it wasn't searching for food or shelter. It was watching. The dog's body was rigid, almost statue-like, its head slightly raised, its eyes locked on the black horizon, as if it expected something to emerge at any second. Then it barked again, low, strained, filled with something Elias couldn't immediately name. It wasn't fear, it was urgency. And then Elias noticed something else, something that unsettled him even more. The dog never looked back, not once. It didn't turn toward the houses, the lights, the human world behind it. Every part of its attention was devoted to the sea, as if nothing else existed, as if nothing else mattered. Elias stayed on the balcony until his hands went numb. He watched as the dog continued its vigil, barking at intervals that felt deliberate, almost ritualistic. When the sky finally began to lighten, when black slowly gave way to gray, the dog stood. It didn't run. It didn't hurry. It simply turned away from the water and walked down the beach. No sound, no hesitation, disappearing into the dunes. Elias exhaled. Only then did he realize he had been holding his breath the entire time. He told himself that was the end of it, that it meant nothing. But that night, sleep did not come easily. And deep inside, beneath years of practiced numbness, something old and heavy stirred. The feeling that this was not a beginning, but a reminder. After that night, Elias began paying attention in a way he hadn't paid attention to anything in years. He told himself it was curiosity, a harmless distraction, something to occupy the empty hours that stretched endlessly between dusk and dawn. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the truth. Curiosity was light. This felt heavy. This felt like being pulled towards something you didn't want to name. The dog came again the following night, and the next, and the one after that. Always after midnight, never earlier, never later. As if the ocean itself had set a schedule and the animal obeyed it with absolute devotion. Elias stopped sleeping through the nights. He brewed strong coffee and waited, sometimes on the balcony, sometimes sitting on the steps leading down to the sand. Occasionally, when the wind was calmer, he walked along the beach, keeping his distance, careful not to disturb whatever silent agreement existed between the dog and the sea. The pattern never changed. The dog would appear from the dunes, walking at an unhurried pace, head low, tail still. It never looked around, never acknowledged Elias or any other presence. It moved with the certainty of someone returning to a duty long accepted. Once it reached the same stretch of sand, always the same, it would stop. Sit, stare, then bark. Each bark echoed slightly differently depending on the tide, the wind, the shape of the night. Sometimes the sound stretched thin and mournful. Other times it snapped sharply against the cliffs, but the intention behind it never shifted. It wasn't noise, it was insistence. Elias noticed details he hadn't seen before. Scars along the dog's flank, a limp in its left hind leg, subtle but persistent. Its coat was coarse and uneven, dulled by salt and sun. This wasn't a young dog. It had lived, it had endured, and yet there was nothing broken about it. No hesitation, no confusion, no madness, only resolve. People began to notice. At first it was whispered complaints, a fisherman muttering about lost sleep, a couple arguing late at night, blaming the barking for their frayed nerves. Someone joked that the dog was haunted. Someone else suggested it should be taken away. No one volunteered to do it. The dog wasn't aggressive, it didn't approach anyone, it didn't snarl or snap. It simply existed, and somehow that unsettled people more than hostility ever could. One evening, Elias overheard two men talking near the docks. "That dog again last night," one said. "Same damn spot." The other spat into the water. "It's not right. Animals don't do that for no reason." "What reason then?" The man shrugged. "Same reason people avoid that part of the sea." They both went quiet. Elias felt something tighten in his chest. That part of the sea. He knew exactly which stretch they meant. Boats rarely passed there anymore. Nets came back torn when they did. Compasses behaved strangely, or so people claimed. Most dismissed it as superstition, but superstition had a way of shaping behavior long after logic tried to erase it. That night, Elias went closer than he ever had before. The wind was low. The moon hung pale and swollen, painting the waves silver. The dog was already there when Elias arrived, sitting at the water's edge, eyes fixed forward. Elias stopped several meters away, unsure whether to announce himself. The dog didn't react. Slowly, Elias lowered himself onto the sand. The cold seeped through his clothes, but he didn't move. He followed the dog's line of sight, scanning the water for movement, for shapes, for anything that could explain this obsession. He saw nothing. Yet the dog barked. A single bark, deep and steady. Elias felt it vibrate through the ground, through his legs, into his chest. It stirred something inside him, a pressure behind his eyes, an ache he thought time had dulled. "How long?" Elias whispered, though he didn't know who he was asking. The dog barked again. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Elias lost track of time, suspended between the rhythmic breathing of the sea and the steady presence beside him. When the barking finally stopped, Elias realized something else. The dog was shaking, not violently, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Still, it did not leave. When dawn approached, the dog rose and walked away as always. Elias remained seated long after it disappeared, staring at the ocean with a growing sense of unease. The sea looked unchanged, but he felt watched, as if something beneath the surface had noticed that finally someone was listening. Once Elias began asking questions, the village changed its posture toward him. Not openly, not aggressively, but subtly. The way people shift their weight when a conversation turns dangerous, the way eyes slide away just before silence falls. At the cafe, the owner stopped asking him how he slept. At the market, fishermen answered him with half sentences and quick nods. The harbour master suddenly remembered urgent tasks whenever Elias approached. No one wanted to talk about the dog, and no one wanted to talk about the sea. Finally, someone did. Her name was Mara. She sold bait near the cliffs, her stall patched together from old boards and rusted nails. Her hands were stiff, swollen with age and salt, but her eyes were sharp, unsettlingly sharp. "You're the one watching the dog," she said before Elias could speak. He hesitated. "I didn't know that was known." She snorted softly. "Nothing goes unnoticed here. We just choose what not to see." Elias swallowed. "Why does it bark?" Mara studied him for a long moment, as if weighing whether he deserved the truth or could survive it. "That dog doesn't bark," she said finally. "It calls." "Calls for what?" Her gaze drifted toward the water. The wind tugged at her grey hair, lifting it like restless fingers. "For what never came back." The words hit Elias harder than he expected. "You mean a person?" She nodded once. "A boat." Elias felt the ground tilt slightly beneath his feet. He knew the story. Everyone did. A small research vessel sent out on a night survey years ago. Sudden storm. Communication lost. Official explanations. Investigations that ended quietly. No bodies. Just fragments. Just silence. "There were 5 of them," Mara continued. "Good people, careful people, the kind that don't disappear without reason." Elias's heart hammered in his ears. "The dog belonged to one of them," she said. "A young man. First job at sea. Brought the dog everywhere. Said it calmed him." Elias closed his eyes. The image formed uninvited. Laughter on a deck. Waves slapping against metal. A dog's tail wagging against the rail. "When the boat didn't return," Mara went on, "the dog waited. Days. Weeks. Right there." She pointed to the exact stretch of sand Elias had memorized by now. At first, people felt sorry for it, fed it, sat with it, told themselves it would move on. "It didn't," Elias whispered. "No," she said. "It learned the truth instead." Elias looked at her sharply. "What truth?" Mara's expression hardened. "That the sea remembers." A chill ran through him. "That dog doesn't bark because it's confused," she continued. "It barks because it knows where they are." Elias's stomach twisted. "That's not possible." "Neither is a compass spinning in calm waters," she replied. "Neither is nets coming back shredded like something fought them. But here we are." Elias said nothing. "People here don't like being reminded," Mara added. "Guilt is heavier than grief." "Guilt for what?" "For looking away," she said simply. "For accepting silence because it was easier than truth." That night, the barking sounded different, sharper, closer, and for the first time, Elias felt certain of something he had been avoiding since the day the boat vanished. The dog wasn't waiting anymore, it was demanding. The night the sea answered did not arrive with thunder or warning. There was no storm, no dramatic change in the sky, no sudden shift in the wind that would later feel symbolic in memory. Everything looked ordinary, and that was what made it terrifying. The ocean was calm in the way predators are calm before they strike, smooth, patient, almost gentle. Elias sensed it before he heard the barking. He woke abruptly, heart racing, breath shallow, the feeling of being summoned ripping him from sleep. The house was silent. No wind rattling the windows, no distant engines. Just the low, constant hush of the sea pressing itself against the land. Then the barking came. Not slow this time, not measured, urgent. Elias was on his feet before his mind caught up, pulling on his jacket, stumbling toward the door as if his body already knew what his thoughts were still afraid to admit. By the time he reached the beach, the dog was already there, standing now, not sitting, muscles taut, eyes locked on the water. It barked again, and again. Each sound cut through the night like a blade. Something was wrong. Elias followed the dog's gaze and felt his stomach drop. The water was moving unnaturally, not with the waves, but against them. A shape rolled beneath the surface, rising and sinking in a way that made Elias's skin prickle. At first, he told himself it was debris, driftwood, a net. Something harmless. His mind was inflating because of fear. Then moonlight caught it. Metal, dull, scarred, wrong. The dog lunged forward, barking violently now, claws digging into the wet sand as if it wanted to pull the sea itself back. Elias stepped into the water. The cold shocked his legs, stealing his breath, but he didn't stop. He waded forward, eyes locked on the shape as it drifted closer, carried by a tide that suddenly felt intentional. The object surfaced fully, a section of hull, bent inward, edges jagged and eaten by rust. Old paint peeled away in strips, revealing raw metal beneath. Elias reached out instinctively, his fingers trembling as they brushed against it. He knew this metal. He had seen it before, not in reality but in photographs, in reports, in the paperwork that had ended a chapter of his life he pretended was closed. Then he saw the letters, faded, broken, barely legible, but unmistakable. The name of the vessel. His throat closed. Behind him, the dog barked one last time, not loud, not desperate, but heavy, exhausted, final, as if it had finally been heard. Elias fell to his knees in the water, gripping the hull fragment as waves washed over him. Memories crashed in, uninvited and merciless. Laughter, arguments, promises made too casually, words never said, his brother's voice. The sea, indifferent until now, felt suddenly accusatory. By the time other villagers arrived, drawn by the barking and Elias's shouts, the tide had delivered more. Fragments, rope, shreds of netting wrapped so tightly around twisted metal that cutting them free felt like surgery on a corpse. Someone called the authorities. Someone cried. No one spoke. The dog sat at the edge of the water, watching. Silent. The days that followed felt unreal, as if the village had slipped into a version of itself no one recognized anymore. Investigators arrived. Questions resurfaced. Old files were pulled from drawers thick with dust and avoidance. The sea, once treated as an unchangeable fact of life, became a suspect. And the dog changed everything. It no longer barked. Night after night it still came to the shore, arriving just after midnight out of habit more than urgency. But now it lay down instead of sitting. Its head rested on the sand, its eyes closed, opening only occasionally to glance at the horizon before settling again, as if its duty had ended. Elias spent those nights beside it, sometimes in silence, sometimes speaking softly into the wind, words meant for someone who would never answer. He told stories the sea had no right to keep. He confessed guilt he had buried beneath rational explanations and official conclusions. "I should have pushed harder," he whispered one night. "I should have asked more questions." The dog's ear twitched, but it did not lift its head. More debris surfaced in the weeks that followed, enough to confirm what many had feared and others had actively denied. The vessel hadn't simply sunk in a storm. It had been dragged, entangled, overwhelmed by abandoned fishing nets that turned the ocean into a silent trap. Negligence, human neglect. The sea hadn't taken them. People had. The village changed after that. Boats altered their routes, old nets were removed. Rules that had once been ignored were suddenly enforced with almost religious seriousness. Not out of regulation, but remorse. And the dog remained. Children began bringing it food. Fishermen nodded at it respectfully. No one tried to chase it away anymore. It had earned its place in a way no human ever could. Elias considered leaving. The house had served its purpose. The sea had spoken. The past had risen to the surface, broken and undeniable. But each time he packed a bag, he found himself stopping. Because some endings didn't feel like closure. They felt like responsibility. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Elias watched the dog stand and walk toward the water. It didn't bark. It didn't stare. It simply approached the edge, let the waves wet its paws, and then turned back. Their eyes met. For the first time, Elias felt something loosen inside his chest. Not forgiveness, not peace, but permission. The permission to stay, to remember, to listen. Silence is not the absence of sound. Elias learned that slowly, in the nights that followed, sitting beside the dog as the ocean breathed in and out like a living thing that had finally spoken its truth and now refused to elaborate further. The barking was gone, but the silence it left behind was heavier than noise ever had been. The village noticed it too. People slept differently. Some said they rested better. Others said they woke more often, uneasy as if something essential had been removed from the night. The barking had become part of the coastline's rhythm, an unwelcome one perhaps, but familiar. Its disappearance left a gap no one quite knew how to fill. Elias understood why. The barking had forced attention, it demanded listening, and now that it was gone, the responsibility shifted back to the humans who had ignored it for so long. During the day, the dog wandered more freely. It no longer confined itself to the shoreline. It moved through the village with quiet dignity, accepting food without desperation, water without fear. Children followed it at a distance, whispering as if afraid to break some invisible rule. They called it the Watcher. No one named it directly. Names felt too small. At night, Elias continued his ritual. He walked to the beach, sat where the dog had once sat, and watched the same stretch of water that had haunted him for years. Some nights the dog joined him. Other nights it stayed farther back, lying near the dunes, eyes half closed but always alert. They were no longer bound by urgency, they were bound by memory. Elias thought often about how close he had come to missing everything. How easy it would have been to dismiss the barking as annoyance, to complain, to close the window, to put on music and drown it out. How many people had done exactly that? He realized then that tragedy does not always arrive screaming. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it repeats itself quietly, patiently, waiting to see who will finally listen. The investigation concluded months later. Official statements were released. Apologies were issued, hollow but necessary. Changes were promised. Some were even implemented. The sea would remain dangerous. That could not be changed, but it would no longer be allowed to hide humanity's negligence so easily. One night, long after the crowds had gone and the village had returned to its quieter self, Elias brought a lantern to the shore. He placed it at the waterline and lit it. Not as a marker, not as a warning, but as acknowledgement. The dog watched from a distance, tail resting against the sand, eyes reflecting the small, steady flame. "I heard you," Elias said aloud, unsure who the words were for. "I'm sorry it took so long." The ocean answered only with waves. But that was enough. Years later, people would tell the story differently. Stories always change with time. They soften where they should sharpen. They simplify what was complex. They turn pain into something easier to digest. In some versions, the dog was miraculous. In others, it was coincidence. In a few, it was barely mentioned at all. But Elias remembered the truth. The truth was quieter. The truth was that one being had refused to look away. That while humans debated, avoided, rationalized, and moved on, a dog had returned to the same place every night and said, in the only language it had, "Something is wrong." The dog grew older. Its steps slowed. Its muzzle grayed completely. Some mornings, Elias found it already waiting outside his door, as if unsure how much longer it would have the strength to walk the beach at night. Elias adopted it without ceremony. There were no declarations, no paperwork, no dramatic moment. One day the dog simply stayed, and Elias did too. They continued their walks, continued their quiet vigils, continued listening to the sea, not for answers anymore, but for understanding. On the last night, the dog walked to the shore. The ocean was calm. There was no moon. Only stars scattered like distant witnesses across the sky. The dog stopped at the water's edge, stood there for a long time, then slowly sat. It did not bark. It did not stare. It simply breathed. Elias sat beside it. Neither spoke, neither needed to. When the dog finally lay down, resting its head against Elias's leg, he knew. Not with fear, not with panic, just with certainty. Some missions end quietly. The dog passed before sunrise, the sound of the sea filling the space where breath once was. Elias buried it near the dunes facing the water. No marker, no name, just a view of the horizon. Years passed. The village changed again. New people arrived. Old ones left. Children grew up hearing fragments of a story they didn't fully understand. But sometimes, on especially quiet nights, someone would pause near the shore and feel something familiar tug at their attention. A sense of being watched, a sense of being called. And they would look at the sea a little longer than usual. If there is one thing Elias learned, the thing he wished more people understood, it was this. Not every voice uses words. Not every warning sounds like danger. And not every hero looks the way we expect. Some heroes sit alone on cold sand, night after night, barking into darkness, waiting for someone, anyone, to care enough to listen. And sometimes, someone finally does.